Hello, everyone. This is Umbra and or Zero, just depending on where you've seen me. Um, and I am coming back with a an Affliction Warlock Spectre rework, V3 or 4. I don't know. I kind of lost track of them. Um, but yeah, this is my take on improving the Affliction tree using the current War Within gameplay in mind. Some initial notes. I made Seed of Corruption baseline. As you can see, it is not here in the tree anymore. I reduced Seed of Corruption's cast time to 1 second and removed its soul shard cost, which would need to happen, but it is what it is. And then I would reduce Seed of Corruption's explosion damage significantly to keep its usage strictly to dot application. This will become more apparent as we'll go a little bit further down the tree. Some other notes: I reduced all the 2-point nodes on retail to 1 point. I felt many of the 2-point nodes were unnecessary or sort of paying the toll to get further into the tree, which felt like on retail it feels very suffocating isn't the right word, but it feels very you have to take all these 2-point nodes just to get to the bottom, just to get further into your tree, which allows not a lot of build diversity, I feel. And then I also moved nodes around to make the overall tree feel better in terms of how talents flow into each other. So like, for example, left side is all drain soul, filler spell stuff. Right side is all rapture, or mostly all rapture stuff. And then like the middle of the tree is mostly dot oriented. Moving on to how Affliction would play with my, again, fan-made rework. The damage playstyle would still be primarily based around Malefic Rapture and its burst windows, but with significantly less ramp time. I added more dot interactions to help them feel more impactful outside of acting solely to buff Rapture, which is outside of Hellcaller with Wither. That's essentially how Affliction plays right now, is all your dots just buff Rapture, and Rapture's most of your damage. Again, outside of Hellcaller. I added talents to help alleviate the dot management aspect in both single target and AoE, while also making them not feel mandatory to take in every single setting. I also added more execute flavor to help cement what I think should be Affliction's gimmick, if you will, of being the premier ranged execute class. In my mind, when I think Affliction and how it's played in the past, I've always really enjoyed this is the ranged, I guess, arms or Fury Warrior equivalent of you're just spamming executes, and your execute is really, really strong. And that's what I feel Affliction should sort of be, but those are feelings versus, actual gameplay stuff. But yeah, without further ado, I'll go through each row and read their effects and my reasonings and or explanations for each node. And a bit of forewarning, I'm not a game developer, nor do I have any game development experience at all. All of the numbers mentioned in this video are just very rough estimates, and given it is a fan-made rework, the numbers are also just in make-believe land, which I may reference a couple times. And feel free to correct me on things that don't make sense, sounded bad, or need more clarification, and I should be able to answer them. Now onto the talent tree. So starting from the top at row 1, we have Unstable Affliction. This is the same as it is on retail. It's got the 1.5 second cast time. It afflicts one target that does shadow damage over 16 seconds. If dispelled, it does a burst of damage to that target and silences them for 4 seconds. And then it also generates a soul shard if the target dies while afflicted. As I mentioned earlier, I wanted to keep Rapture as the main soul shard spender, as I believe it has been the best way to tune Affliction's damage, I feel. I know everyone wants like Legion Affliction or Mop Affliction back, where like you just multi-dot everything and you just do a bajillion damage. But the way the game has evolved, and with also the issue of dot specs are notorious to balance. I mean, you can just look at Shadow Priest and Affliction throughout like pretty much their entire lifespan, especially like, you know, Legion, where they were, I would say, peak levels of dots being overpowered. Rapture, I feel, has it both brings a modern feel to the spec as of recording this, which is the War Within, and due to the kind of gameplay style that's demanded right now, which is dump all your damage out as quickly as possible. And I feel Rapture fills that niche better over having Unstable Affliction as a spender, or having even Seed of Corruption as a spender is nice, but I still feel like Rapture is the better choice when considering single target and AoE. Now, moving on to Road 2, the first node on the left here, we have Perdition. It reads as, target suffering from Unstable Affliction, take 10% increased damage from your Agony, Unstable Affliction, and Corruption spells, and 5% from Malefic Rapture. Pretty simple. It's a single target, primarily a single target buff, which I feel is Affliction's issue. It has an issue of its single target sometimes being pretty meh. But this would purely buff your or it would be a pure single target buff, and your main 3 dots as well as Rapture. So it's a way to buff the single target without having the AoE get super out of control. Also, as this is a fan-made rework, I don't know if the Rapture buff included in this would be needed, as several talents down the row or down the tree also buff Rapture's damage significantly, and the multiple percent buffs may get out of hand very fast. Yeah, that's pretty much that. And then moving on to the next node in Road 2, we have Writhen Agony, which reads as, Agony no longer gains stacks, but now deals its full damage 10% faster and lasts an additional 5 seconds to 23 seconds. This is one of the major changes I feel will rub some players the wrong way. My intention is to make dropping Agony not feel as punishing, while also preserving its ramping damage aspect. I understand that the stacking mechanic of Agony is a form of skill expression, but I feel that in WoW's current game state of gotta go fast, the ramping to 18 stacks and then losing them if you can't refresh it feels outdated and clashes with this current gameplay idea. Also, adding the extra 5 seconds to it, I feel would help with maintaining Agony in multi-target environments such as Council, bosses, or Mythic Plus, especially with the change to Vital Taint that I will go into a little bit later. Moving on to Row 3, the first node we have is Dark Virtuosity. Pretty simple. It reads as, Shadow Bolt and Drain Soul deal 10% additional damage. This is a 2-point talent node currently on retail, again as of patch 11.1. That honestly should just be a 1-point node for what it does. And then I also kept a lot of the 2-point nodes that exist on retail. I kept their 2-point values at 1 point. The next is a choice node between Absolute Corruption and Siphon Life. Absolute Corruption is now permanent and deals 20% increased damage. PvP thing exists, I just copy pasted the tooltip. And then Siphon Life, corruption damage is increased by 25%, and now heals you for 5% of the damage it does. Both of these function as they do on retail, with the exception of I buffed Absolute Corruption to 20%, because honestly I feel I don't like Siphon Life, and the quality of life aspect that Absolute Corruption brings, I feel should just be like the default choice. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Moving on to Kindled Malice, which reads as, Malefic Rapture damage increased by 8%, Corruption damage increased by 20%. This is another 2-point talent node on retail that should just be 1 point. Same as Dark Virtuosity, I kept its 2-point value at 1 point. Now moving on to row 4 and the last set of talents in gate 1, Nightfall, which reads as corruption damage has a chance to cause your next Shadow Bolt or Drain Soul to deal 25% increased damage. Shadow Bolt is instant cast, and Drain Soul channels 30% faster and can be channeled while moving when affected. Casting another spell while channeling Drain Soul will cancel this effect. The proc functions the same as it does on retail, but with some additional changes. I decreased the channel duration on Drain Soul from 50% to 30%. Again, numbers may vary, 30% may still be too strong, I don't know. But I added the cause of Drain Soul being able to channel while casting, essentially, while you have a Nightfall proc. I added this feature to help with fights where frequent movement is occurring, so like a Queen Ansarek, a Brood Twister, a Rashinon fight, where Drain Soul may be technically better, but you don't really run it because you have to plant and cast, which sucks. And again, not sure if the 30% on top of the channeling would be too high of a number to this, and also again, it would help the feeling of having to cut a Nightfall empowered Drain Soul. It would get rid of that because it sucks to have to do that. And the final node over here is Relinquished, which reads as Agony has a 25% increased chance to generate a Soul Shard. This effect is reduced beyond 4 targets affected by Agony. I should probably... There we go. Update that. So this currently is like down here in the tree, roughly. Which I feel like for what it does and for how low it is on the retail tree, it shouldn't do that. I buffed it from the 10% chance it is on retail to 25% chance, while adding the reduce beyond 4 targets clause to not make the shard generation get out of hand in AoE scenarios. This I feel would make a nice kind of gate 1 talent node, because Affliction has an issue of RNG shard generation, and I feel Relinquished being this high up in the tree with the 25% chance, which I believe that was its initial beta incarnation number. Could be wrong on that. But yes, I feel like having this high up here in the tree would help alleviate Affliction's issue of shard generation in single target. Now moving on to the second gate of talents, starting with row 5, we have Drain Soul and Improved Shadow Bolt. It's the same as it is on retail. You have Drain Soul, you channel, dealing shadow damage. It does double damage in against targets below 20% health, generates a soul shard if the target dies during this effect. Improved Shadow Bolt reduces the cast time of Shadow Bolt by 15% and increases its damage by 40%. Not much there. The next node is Summoner's Embrace and Grimoire Sacrifice, another choice node. Summoner's Embrace, it increases the damage dealt by you and your pet by 3%, and Grimoire Sacrifice, you sacrifice your demon and you get a random proc chance to do damage. Again, this is the same as it is on retail. I would like Gosak to be buffed to make it even with Summoner's Embrace, because sometimes I like sacrificing over your Voidwalker to get that increased stamina, which you can pair with Dark Pact to get an absurdly ludicrous shield. But honestly, that is more of a personal nitpick than I would like this to happen. But yeah, that's it. Moving on to the final talent of row 5. This is one of the spicier reworks I have on the tree. So this is a choice node between Vile Taint and Phantom Singularity, which reads as Vile Taint. Your Seed of Corruption becomes empowered with a Vile Infusion, now embedding demon seeds into 2 additional nearby enemies. When Seed of Corruption detonates or a target is damaged by Malefic Rapture while Unstable Affliction is applied to them, it triggers a vile explosion, dealing shadow damage over 10 seconds to all enemies within 10 yards and applies Agony and Curse of Exhaustion to them. This effect can only occur every 30 seconds. Vile Taint Dot does increase Rapture's damage. And then Phantom Singularity, it's pretty much the same as it is on retail. Places a Phantom Singularity above the target, which consumes the life of all enemies within 15 yards, dealing shadow damage over 15 seconds, healing you for 25% of the damage done. The only change to Phantom Singularity I made would have haste not increase, or haste would increase the number of ticks that it does, but not reduce its duration. Going further into this, the idea for the Vile Taint rework and how it should work is you have Seed in AoE or Rapture in single target, so it isn't completely dead in single target. Apply Vile Taint and by extension Corruption and Agony as well in terms of Seed versus Vile Taint. Seed would also regain its Sow the Seeds functionality this way by launching 3 seeds in total. This would help, having the 3 seeds would help with like Mythic Plus packs, where if the tank is moving or kiting, it feels awful having to waste multiple Seed of Corruption casts when the seed only hits one target you cast on, or only 1 or 2 additional mobs. So having the 3 seed functionality would help our setup and keys drastically, as instead of requiring 5+ casts over roughly 10 seconds minimum to set up on a pack, it would be just Unstable Affliction into Seed, use Haunt to pop the Seed, Soul Rot, and then you hit Dark Lair and you just start rapturing. I also didn't want to take Shadow Crash and just make it Affliction flavored, so I reworked Vile Taint to both bring back Sow the Seeds and also make it one less button needed to be pressed in an AoE scenario. And again, Phantom Singularity, I worked slightly different from retail. It lasts a static 15-second baseline, as on retail, Haste reduces its duration, which impacts your overall Rapture damage because it doesn't last as long. And it also impacts Infirmity, which is this talent down here that I'll get to later. Haste would instead just increase the number of damage ticks it does. And this was done to, again, help alleviate the Infirmity problem on retail, where you don't get the full value of Phantom Singularity or its damage amp via Infirmity due to its odd haste scaling. Now, moving on to row 6, we have the first node, which is Shadow Embrace, which reads as Shadow Bolt and Drain Soul apply Shadow Embrace, increasing your damage dealt to the target by 2.5/5% for 16 seconds. Stacks up to 4 times for Drain Soul or 2 times for Shadow Bolt. Its functionality is the same as it is on retail, just buffed from, I believe it's 8 to 10%. 10%, I like multiples of 5 when it comes to numbers, so I feel I like the 10%, but honestly the 8% can still probably go. Now the node to the right of it is Rotten Decay, which reads as Shadow Bolt damage increases the duration of your Unstable Affliction, Corruption, and Agony on the target by 3 seconds. Drain Soul damage increases the duration of your Unstable Affliction, Corruption, and Agony on the target by 1 second. This is currently a PvP talent with a very simple functionality of extending your 3 main dots on the target. I feel like this would be nice to have for simple quality of life dot management, but by no means do I want it to feel mandatory to take. Also, personally, I would rather have this PvP talent over Oblivion, but that's me. Now, moving on to the next node over, this is Cascading Calamity, which reads as Unstable Affliction periodic damage occurs. I should probably change it to Afflictions. No. Unstable Affliction is probably how it should be worded. Periodic damage occurs 25% faster, and when cast on a target suffering from Unstable Affliction, it increases your haste by 5% for 18 seconds. Very simple UA buff that adds... oh, I didn't fix that. This is more meant for single target scenarios. Gives you haste for maintaining UA. It has UA do its damage quicker, which I know can be some issues. And like, I really only added it because of the 11.1 tier set where your Unstable Afflictions can spread whenever you proc that tier set. But because it does its damage over such a long period of time, it doesn't feel good. But also this Cascading Calamity interacts with one of the capstone nodes, which I will get to later. Moving on to Summon Dark Glare, which reads as 2-minute cooldown. You summon a Dark Glare from the Twisting Nether that extends the duration of your damage over time effects on all enemies by 10 seconds. The Dark Glare will serve you for 20 seconds, blasting its target for shadow damage, increased by 50% for each damage over time effect you have active on their current target. During its duration, Dark Glare will generate 1 soul shard every 5 seconds. So I took it upon myself to rework Dark Glare in a way to be a much more impactful cooldown when compared to Infernal or Tyrant for Destruction and Demonology, respectively. Functionality, it remains the same as it does on retail, with some numbers adjusted to make it hit harder. I added the Soul Shard generation clause to it to add more reliability when it comes to generating Soul Shards for Affliction. I felt 5 Soul Shards generated in total, or 1 every 4 seconds, wasn't too overwhelming nor too degenerate to allow spamming Rapture for, like 10 seconds straight. And moving on to the next node is Sacrilash's Dark Strike, which reads as corruption damage is increased by 15%, and each time it deals damage, it has a chance to trigger an additional tick of damage. Each time corruption deals damage, it increases the duration of your curses on the target by 0.04 seconds. It essentially acts the same as it does on retail, with the added bonus of it extends curses slightly longer, as on retail it is a 0.2 second increased duration versus here being a 0.4 second increased duration. Maybe that's an issue for PvP, but given I'm coming at this from a more PvE standpoint, I don't care. And the added bonus of the extra tech I felt added more flair to the ability, besides it being a boring corruption damage increased and its curse extension functionality, which I get some people don't press, like Curse of Exhaustion or Curse of Weakness on targets. So I felt like just having, I felt like it needed just like a little bit extra to make it not just it buffs the spell by X percentage. But moving on to the next node, Infirmity, which reads as Vile Taint cooldown reduced by 10 seconds. Enemies affected by Vile Taint extends the effects of agony on those targets by 0.25 seconds, and targets damaged by Vile Taint take 10% increased damage from you. Phantom Singularity cooldown reduced by 15 seconds. The primary target takes 20% increased damage from you and your primary pet. As I discussed with Vile Taint's rework that I mentioned earlier, this provides a 10-second cooldown reduction to the Vile Taint effect, making it a 20-second cooldown. It also adds in an agony dot extension effect to make it so you should be able to have Vile Taint be able to extend your agonies without worrying about them falling off. I also added the 10% damage amp clause to mirror what the talent did, as its incarnation of the 10.1 or Aberrus tier set, where Vile Taint targets took 10% increased damage, and then I think Phantom Singularity took like 15% increased damage. The changes I made for Phantom Singularity were more geared towards it making the premier single target choice, while also making it a 30-second cooldown, which makes it line up significantly better with Affliction's 1/2 minute cooldowns. And now to the final node of row 6, Tormented Crescendo, which reads as, while Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction are active, your Shadow Bolt has a 35% chance, and your Drain Soul has a 25% chance to make your next Malefic Rapture cost no soul shards and cast instantly. This is the same as it is on live, with just buffed numbers to make it more consistent and help tone down the already RNG heavy nature of Affliction. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Now moving on to the row 7 talents. Starting off with Haunt, which reads as 15-second cooldown. Ghostly Soul haunts the target, dealing shadow damage, and increases your shadow damage over time dealt to the target by 20%, and your non-periodic shadow damage dealt to the target by 10% for 15 seconds. Applies 1 stack of Shadow Embrace, or refreshes its duration. If the target dies, Haunt's cooldown is reset. So what I did was I took the functionality of Haunt and Improved Haunt that currently exists on retail, again as of patch 11.1, and combined them, as I felt it shouldn't be... You shouldn't have to pay 2 points to like pay the toll, and this is just how Haunt should work in the first place. I also reworked it slightly to function more closely to its classic / Season of Discovery incarnation by making it instant cast, and I don't think it's off the GCD in Classic or Season of Discovery either, but making it instant cast to alleviate Affliction's problem of having arguably the most GCDs required to play or set up its damage in the game. I could be wrong on that, but I think Affliction has the most... You need to spend the most GCDs to set up your damage. But yeah, also, instead of increasing all damage dealt to the target, which would affect trinkets and other green text items damaged, I focused it on the player's dots. I focused it on buffing the player's dots and direct shadow damage, so your Shadow Bolts and Rapture. This was done to help the player's dots feel more impactful, while also not leaving out your direct damage spells out of the buff. And then it has improved Haunt's functionality of applying a stack of Shadow Embrace or refreshing its duration. Moving on to Malediction. Malediction reads as, it increases the crit chance of your Agony, Corruption, and UA by 10%. It's a 2-point talent node on retail that I felt was unnecessary to keep it 2 points, and just made it a 1-point node. Kept its 2-point value at 1 node. Or kept its 2-point value at 1 point. Now on to Malevolent Visionary, which reads as, increases the damage and duration of your summoned Dark Glare by 50%. When Dark Glare extends your damage over time effects, it also increases the tick rate of those effects by 25%, but does not reduce their duration. So I reworked this to assist with making Dark Glare feel like a more impactful cooldown. Outside of, again on retail, it hits like a wet noodle and it extends our dots durations. Also, with the damage and duration, it lasts 30 seconds, which would also increase the number of soul shards generated from 4 to 6, did I? Yeah, from 4 to 6. So you would get 6 soul shards over the duration. I did this to just help Dark Glare feel like a cooldown that you press and you're like, oh yeah, my big eyeball is ripping damage, it's actually doing damage instead of just, popping up and going, hey guys, here you go. But anyway, on to the next talent is Contagion, which reads as, it increases the crit strike damage of your Agony, Corruption, and UA by 30%. Again, it's another 2-point talent node on retail that I made 1 point, kept its 2-point value at 1 point. Now for the final talent point in row 7, Focus Malignancy, which reads as, Malefic Rapture deals 40% increased damage to targets suffering from Unstable Affliction. Same functioning as it is on retail, just buffed to 40% from 25% that it is on retail. I will admit 40% may be too powerful with the other modifiers I have in this tree, but I will reiterate again, this is a fan-made tree, and the numbers do not reflect what would be considered balance in the actual game. Yeah, so moving on to row 8, we have the first talent out here, Withering Bolt, which reads as Shadow Bolt and Drain Soul deal 15% increased damage, up to 45% per damage over time effect you have active on that target. It's the same as it is on retail. I just buffed it from the 24% to the 45%. I also buffed it because this would be purely a single target damage buff and would not affect its AoE in any way. Next up is Soul Rot, which I did rework a little. So minute cooldown, 1.5 second cast, wither away all life force of your current target and up to 3 additional targets nearby, causing your target to suffer nature damage, double nature damage to the primary target, and half of that to secondary targets. Another rework part of this, casting Shadow Bolt or Drain Soul on the primary target affected by Soul Rot will cause it to chain to other enemies affected by Soul Rot. Drain Soul channeled this way costs no mana. Shadow Bolt costs no mana when cast on these targets, but they deal 50% less damage to secondary targets. Drain Soul or Shadow Bolts that affect secondary targets apply Shadow Embrace to them, but at a 50% reduced effectiveness. These forked Drain Souls / Shadow Bolts do not benefit from, spoiler, Malefic Grasp, Nightfall, Withering Bolt, or Death's Embrace modifiers. Damage modifiers. I don't know why I didn't add that. So I reworked this from its 11.1 version of just healing you for the damage it deals into bringing back the sort of forking element that it had before, but this time it would fork Drain Soul and Shadow Bolt instead. I reduced the number of enemies afflicted from 5 to 4 because I feel like 5 would be a little bit too out of hand. I like the idea of its old incarnation of being able to fork Drain Life on up to 5 targets affected by Soul Rot, but I brought it back with a bit more what I would consider better functionality. Given there's more value in like Drain Souling or Shadow Bolting targets to apply said Shadow's Embrace. But also I feel like this would help assist on Council Cleave fights or Mythic Plus pulls to allow you to do more priority damage on up to 4 targets total, but it's still tied to a 1 minute cooldown. Also, AoE, Drain Soul, and Shadow Bolts would just look really cool. And then the final node in row 8 is improved Malefic Rapture. It's the same as it is in retail. I just buffed the damage portion from 5% to 10%. Again, I don't know if 10%, 40%, 5%, 10%, 10 or 20% from this, like, and then 8% from that. I don't know if all of these would make Rapture scaling get a little bit out of hand, but again, not a game dev. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just making up ideas that sound cool and throwing them in a tree. But anyway, we'll go on to the row 9 talents. First up, we have an old returning ability from previous expansions, Malefic Grasp, which reads as, while channeling Drain Soul, your damage over time effects deal 20% increased damage to the target. Shadow Bolt damage and causes your damage over time effects to deal 20% increased damage to those targets for 3 seconds. It matches, the 3 seconds is more there just because it just should match Drain Soul's channel duration. I added this to my tree because A, it was an iconic ability, but also B, it would help boost our dot damage in purely single target. And I felt like it'd be a nice boost to our damage over time effects in single target and would help avoid the issue of if dots are really strong in single target, then the AoE would be absurdly overpowered. Sort of balancing nightmare that existed in at least Legion to my knowledge. I'm Legion baby. I don't know about previous expansions. But moving on to the next talent, Creeping Death. Your Agony, Corruption, and UA deal damage 15% faster. Exact same as it is on retail. Not much else to say. Moving on from there, Ravenous Afflictions, with approximately a 3 proc per minute rate of critical strikes from your Agony, Corruption, and UA have a chance to grant Nightfall. This is the same as it is on retail currently, except on retail it's a capstone over here, roughly where my mouse cursor is. I just adjusted the proc rate from 1.2 ppm to 3 ppm to make it feel more impactful and noticeable. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Next to that, leading out of Soul Rot, we have Malign Omen, which reads as reduces the cast time of Soul Rot by 0.5 seconds. Casting Soul Rot grants 3 applications of Malign Omen. Malign Omen, your next Rapture, deals 20% increased damage and extends the duration of your damage over time effects, and Haunt by 2 seconds. This is essentially how it functions on retail, with the added clause of reducing Soul Rot's cast time down to 1 second. I can't remember if Soul Rot's cast time can be hasted. If so, then I would probably just remove this portion of the ability. Moving on, we have Deliberate Malice, which reads as each cast of Malefic Rapture extends the duration of Corruption, Agony, and Unstable Affliction by 2 seconds. If Absolute Corruption is talented, the targets instead take a tick of Corruption's damage. This is the name of the 9.2 Affliction tier 2-piece bonus from Sepulchre, the first ones from Shadowlands. Although with this talent, I removed the damage amp that the 2-piece had and just kept the rest of the functionality that the tier had. Very basic, just you press Rapture, you extend dots, call it a day. It's very simple. Dot extension works AoE, single target. Mandatory? Absolutely not. Really nice quality of life stuff? Absolutely. Next is a reworked version of Malefic Touch, which reads as Malefic Rapture deals an additional shadow flame damage over 5 seconds to each target it affects, up to 6 targets. If this effect is reapplied, any remaining damage will be added to the new Malefic Touch. Damaging targets suffering from Unstable Affliction instead doubles the duration and damage on those targets. This damage does not contribute to Malefic Rapture. So I wanted Malefic Touch to not be just a boring extra damage instance added to Rapture like it is on retail. I feel like making it a baby version of Devouring Plague that Shadow Priests have would give it a bit more flair by having adding onto the spec fantasy of Affliction being a dot-based spec, and it feels really bad that you don't really have a lot of dots that do much. I also made it to where it would not contribute to Rapture's damage, while also not feeling like you need to min-max the dots uptime, akin to an annoying maintenance buff like Dread Touch from Dragonflight or the Malefic Grasp legendary from Shadowlands. And moving on to the final node of Roll 9 is Encroaching Curses, which reads as when you cast Malefic Rapture on a target suffering from your Unstable Affliction, Agony, and Corruption, it spreads your curses, applying Agony and Corruption to a target around it that does not already have Agony or Corruption applied to it, but at a reduced duration. And this would, with Corruption, it would work with Absolute Corruption, so if you have it talented, the Corruption would still be permanent from this effect. The wording is probably a bit confusing, but the functionality would be simple. Whenever you cast Rapture on a target suffering from your 3 main dots, it would spread your 2 smaller dots onto nearby enemies. The idea behind this was to allow a slow sort of build-up of applying your dots during an extended period of time, during a council boss fight, without having the slog of having to tab target and apply your dots individually to each target. So like a fight that comes to mind would be like Prototype Pantheon or Council of Dreams. May that fight never come back into existence. But yeah, that's the idea of it. Now moving on to row 10, the capstone nodes of the Affliction tree. Starting with Death's Embrace, which reads as Agony, Corruption, UA, Shadow Bowl, and Drain Soul deal up to 50% increased damage on targets below 35% health. Higher damage increase against lower targets. I changed its current functionality as it is on retail to be instead more like its Legion counterpart. For me, this helped with bringing the F should be the Giga Execute range spec fantasy that I personally enjoy about Affliction. I also made it only apply to your filler spells in 3 main dots to help with it not being potentially extremely overpowered in cleave scenarios. Next up, we have a reworked Xavius' Gambit, which reads as Unstable Affliction deals 40% increased damage, and its periodic damage has a chance to flare up, dealing some of its damage to nearby enemies. And the flare up would also work in single target. Very simple but potent talent. It would have roughly a 5 proc per ppm to it. I feel like this would make UA feel a lot better in single target, doing it to be target capped to 1, ignoring the PvP talent or the 11.1 tier, while also giving it some cleave damage in scenarios where that would be nice. And again, this paired with Cascading Calamity, you have the haste bonus from refreshing it, but also you would get the UA damage out quicker and those like kind of pulsing ticks out a lot quicker too. Next up is the middle capstone, Dark Harvest, where it reads as each target affected by your Soul Rot increases your haste and crit strike chance by 5% for 8 seconds. This bonus is doubled if Soul Rot only affects one target. It's the same as it is on retail. I changed it from 4% to 5% since it affects one less target, so you still get that 20% bonus to your crit and haste, while also adding the crit and haste amp to be doubled in single target, as it feels kind of bad when you press it in single target and you're only getting like a 4% as it is on retail right now, versus its intended purpose of cleave scenarios. And the second to last capstone is Cull of the Weak, which has been reworked to read as Malefic Rapture damage is increased by 15% against targets below 20% health on up to 4 targets. Higher damage increase against lower health targets. Additionally, Tormented Crescendo has a 5% increased chance to trigger. As of patch 11.1, Cull of the Weak is a bit of an awkward talent for where it is located in the tree. As for what it provides is its really strong funnel damage potential for fights that feature more than one target. I feel like giving it the execute clause while also keeping this bonus locked to 4 targets maximum would help alleviate the issue of the strong funnel damage. Again, I like the idea of Affliction being an execute spec, so I also felt having your whole kit essentially be able to execute was really nice. The added TC bonus could probably be removed, as I could see it being too overpowered, but again, this is all made up and the numbers don't matter. That's pretty much it. And onto the final capstone, as well as the final node for my Affliction rework tree, is Calamitous Pandemic, which reads as Consuming Tormented Crescendo causes the corpses of up to 5 targets that died with agony and corruption applied to them to erupt in a cloud of viscera, dealing shadow damage to nearby enemies and applying agony and corruption to them. I just need to add that for myself. Deals reduced damage beyond 4 targets. This would work like Corpse Explosion from Diablo, but it is only applied through TC procs. The idea behind this was to have a way to mass apply Agony and Corruption in Mythic Plus, or hectic ad fights such as Brood Twister Ovanax and Nerobar Palace, outside of Seed of Corruption and Vile Taints cooldowns. Admittedly, this is one of the talent nodes I keep going back and forth on what it should be, or even do, so it's admittedly one of the weaker talent ideas I had for this. But with that, this will conclude my Affliction fan-made rework V3. Drop your ideas and comments below on what you guys think of this, and I will see you guys